Okay, I'm finally ready to publish my review of Assassin's Creed Odyssey. To boil it all down to one simple sentiment, I like the game. I would recommend it to open world RPG fans, I would recommend it to Assassin's Creed fans. It happily surprised me, if we're being totally honest here, and that's a great thing. But for those interested in a more depth explanation as to why I feel this way, and also a deeper look at some of its flaws for those who are still on the fence about it, let's get started. I'm going to keep this review relatively clear of spoilers because the game has some really good segments of storytelling that everyone should get to experience for themselves. There was this one mission where a plaster cast of a penis was involved and someone couldn't take a joke, and it was just unique and funny overall, and it was really well done. But on the flip side, they obviously jumped through quite a few politically correct hoops, and they clearly took politics heavily into consideration during development. This by no means ruins the game, and I won't derail the review completely into a political discussion, but just know that historical accuracy in any sense of the word is out the window. Whether it's names that don't exist, curse words that weren't linguistically used in the time period, sharks in places where there weren't any sharks, or women Spartan commanders and soldiers, which was categorically not a thing. The list goes on, but there are thousands of places where historical accuracy just has to be completely forgotten. That's not necessarily a bad thing, though. Assassin's Creed was never marketed as point-for-point historical replication, a league of parkour assassins with crazy complex period inaccurate gadgets and an underlying conspiracy in global affairs. Yeah, not so historically literal, but that gives them more freedom to develop characters and narratives and expand on the content that the game brings to the table, which is exactly what they have done. Dollar for dollar, Assassin's Creed Odyssey is a pretty good benchmark for what I expect out of a $60 single-player game. Between side missions, arena fights, conquests, and the main story, you will end up with a couple hundred hours worth of content at least, if you are more towards a completionist. Even if you casually just progress through the main narrative, it's upwards of 60 hours, and thanks to, finally, their introduction of choice-based consequences, there is an element of replayability. To be quite honest though, and I just have to say this, a good chunk of the choices seem to be false pathways, and regardless of what you choose, it ends in the same result, so keep that in mind. Not every single dialogue option matters at all, in fact most of them don't, but some of them do have a big impact, and they can result in, let's say, the death of an NPC, which would for instance have offered further quests, or other options in general. They sold this as a big deal when they marketed the game, and don't get me wrong, it's great to have, but they don't deserve any special points for this. Their competition has been doing it for many, many years. The game has also taken on a new face, and that face is one of a true RPG. Leveling through a skill tree, a gear rarity curve, enhancements, crafting, and various beneficial stats are all utilized. For those who enjoy these elements of choice and overarching progression, that's a huge positive, but it's a far cry from the original Assassin's Creed vision, so true diehard fans of the day one premise may not be so enthused. The game does retain the parkour and also retains the high-value target assassination concept through a network of conspiracists that simultaneously upgrade your relic spear and present you with expanding power tiers and choices, but again, it's a far cry from the original Assassin's Creed from so many years ago. Odyssey also introduces the Mercenary Bounty system, something I initially hated but ended up loving in the end. At first it can be really annoying carrying a bounty seemingly all the time and having to jump through hoops to keep it off of you, but after a while it becomes clear that the mercenaries offer a good source of experience and loot, which in turn means wealth and resources, so I warmed up to them. They also have this complex interaction with other characters in-game, sometimes joining the fight in a chaotic way, or not just attacking you, but everyone else. It can be fun clashing head-to-head with some of them over the course of a playthrough, so in the end, I appreciated the system as just another form of spicing up the gameplay and making sure there is enough content flowing constantly to deserve your attention. One thing that hit me pretty hard at the beginning and left me a bit uncertain whether or not the game was for me, for a brief period at least, was their usage of the battle at Thermopylae, the iconic clash between Leonidas, a very small force of Spartans, and a horde of Persian warriors commanded by the god king Xerxes. This battle is a landmark in all of history, and the game decided to just really casually brush by it and then move on to its own storyline, which, brutal honesty here, cheapened the story from the jump in my eyes. Nothing they write can compete with the epic saga of Thermopylae, not to mention the fact it offered up such a perfectly primed opportunity to have Greek unity and collaboration to defend native soil from an invading superpower. But anyways, they went a different direction here, and the story did win me back over, but it was really jarring to have it all laid out within the first couple of minutes, like, oh, here is one of the most iconic battles in the history of the world. Oh, never mind, it's over. Okay, well, what could we possibly be building up to now that would beat that? For those with little to no interest in that period of history, you won't care at all, so I'll just move on now. One of the darker sides of the game is its microtransactions. Though admittedly not as bad as what Shadow of War tried to pull, the game has clearly been balanced, at least in my experience, around the use of game-enhancing microtransactions. They even sell, quite literally, a permanent XP booster, which makes you gain all experience 50% faster than you do if you opt not to spend any real money. When I discussed this in a previous video, I got some heat for it, and that still honestly confuses me. Some people were like, oh, I never struggled for experience or had to grind and felt like there was a gap between main story quests. You're just bad. I don't get that. I'm pretty good at games, RPGs especially, and this game felt pretty easy to me. I played on 2 different difficulties for large segments of the game. The first being easy, of course, to gather more reliable footage, to experience story, and prep myself for this review, and the second being Nightmare, to challenge myself. While Nightmare is obviously harder, it's just a product of health and damage numbers, and the AI can still be outsmarted and manipulated to make the game pretty simple and, for lack of a better word, easy. It may be slow, but it's easy. In fact, the most fun I seemed to have was actually playing on easy difficulty, but completing content about 4 or 5 levels above me. This yielded increased difficulty, but did not sacrifice pacing or make you get annoyingly one-shotted by things you didn't even see coming. The way the game's progression works is that even things that are 1 or 2 levels outside of your exact character level range are either significantly harder or far, far easier to beat. I don't like this balancing technique very much because it is greatly accentuated on higher difficulties. Meaning if an enemy is level 30 and you're 29 on, let's say, hard or nightmare or whatever, well, you may be completely screwed. But if you're 30 and he's 29, you may just face roll him sometimes. It felt really constricting for such an open world. Like you have to be doing very specific quests and content to be progressing at a good clip while inside the right bracket of enemy level. This is why I'm so confused by the players who claim that they never had to grind or who assert that they never had gaps between content that served as an incentive for the XP booster. The game can't be balanced around both playstyles. You either gain 50% extra XP or you don't, and 50% is a lot, especially for a permanent boost. So in light of that huge gain, if the overall game were balanced around not having that boost, it would go by too quickly for those who did buy the boost itself. They would be over-leveled way too fast, and due to the bracket system, it would get all sorts of messed up really quickly. Instead, and this is pretty obvious to me, they balanced it around those who do purchase that boost because A, they make more money, and B, there are very few drawbacks to having players underleveled, especially if there is side content or grinding mechanics for them to catch up. All the while, that's more time where they are considering grabbing that booster to speed it all up, and hence more money. It does not ruin the entire game, but it's a fact that they intentionally set up a system to incentivize microtransaction purchase, and that needs to be acknowledged so the gamers can make their own determinations based on it. Now onto something I just absolutely love, and that is the Conquest mechanics. The conquests are not 100% essential to the storyline, and you are free to choose when you execute most of them and which side you back to boot, Athens or Sparta. The attackers typically have a disadvantage and the defenders a position of power, but the rewards also reflect this. You can take some easier spoils with less risk, or you can back the opposite side and rake in extra loot in general for your trouble. The battlefield itself is, in my opinion, a true masterpiece. All too often, big battles like this are fabrications. What you do does not matter, and instead you get some fake or invulnerable enemies fighting on the sides, and they're just aesthetic, while 1 or 2 come after you once in a while. It's seen in many games, and it's terrible, it's lazy, and it's boring. Conquest, though, is not that. In a Conquest match, all of the soldiers on the field are live and active. Among them are commanders or lieutenants, though you can't tell which is which right off the bat. When your soldiers die, your side edges towards defeat, and when their soldiers die, the same thing occurs. Over time, the enemy elites reveal themselves, and you can take them down, or you can just keep fighting, and eventually, if you defeat enough of their forces, you win the whole battle. The mode makes you genuinely feel like a one-man army, moving mountains to overcome an enemy force, because you quite literally are. And as you hew down enemy after enemy, their force shrinks and the battlefield becomes less populated. Furthermore, as you fly through enemies and damage some and you kill others, or you just cause general mayhem, one of those enemies may turn out to be a lieutenant later on in the battle. So as they surface, half of their health is already gone due to your powerful AoE abilities or any other combination of factors. It's truly a persistent, fluid, living battle, and it's a fantastic additional piece of content in Odyssey. All of this goes hand in hand with an enormous map, though travel time can cause a bit of a hassle if you forget some of those pesky viewpoints while you are initially traveling the world, and an upgradable ship with decently polished combat mechanics, and a populated Greek sea with pirates, faction ships, quests, and more. I personally avoided quite a bit of the naval combat and the quests there, not because it's bad, but because it's not really my personal favorite. But having that with a fight arena, the bounty mercenary system, the League of Cultists, your own character progression, side quests, conquests, taming animals, recruiting leaders, and the main story, all of this combined makes for a game that leaves me pretty satisfied with my purchase. If I had to give it a numerical rating, it would be an 8. Now, that may seem low to some people, but the only reason for that is glitches. There are quite a few glitches. Sometimes you die and your tamed animal isn't tamed anymore. Other times you just get stuck in terrain and then you die. Or you have to reload an older save and you lose progress. The bugs can be frustrating, but they don't overtake the experience as a whole. And once they're patched, which will probably be quite soon, it will be a solid 8.5 out of 10. It would be a 9, a real solid 9, but they just had to go down the microtransaction route. They really couldn't help themselves. In the end, it's one of the best Assassin's Creed games to date, if not the best. Black Flag will always have a warm place in my heart personally, but this is definitely up there. However, like Origins, they need to take an extra year now, which they are doing, and it's great to see them do that, but they could take even more time perhaps. Push the series further, because yearly release gaming is just reskinned trash nowadays. And after coming this far and building up this high, to push out a cash grab, badly made sequel or prequel or whatever would be completely unacceptable. Ubisoft does a decent job of expanding on games post-release, and usually that expansion is to dig out a failed or bumpy launch, like The Division or Rainbow Six Siege, but in this case, successful further content would just compound the base of what Odyssey is, and despite my aggressive pessimism at times, this game deserves an honest thumbs up and positive review. That's going to wrap it up. As always, there are links down below to support the channel or get more involved with Upper Echelon. There's links to our Facebook group, our gaming forums, Discord server, and my Twitch channel. I'll probably stream again with Red Dead Redemption 2 when it launches, but I'm not really sure outside of that. If you have any feedback, drop it in the comments down below, and as always, have a nice night.